Story 1, Martin Morales. The Curse of the Forgotten People. When I received the order, I wasn't surprised. It was always me, Martin Morales, who was chosen for the strangest and most distant missions. This time, he had to travel to a remote village in the mountains, a place forgotten by time and maps. I was told to investigate strange disappearances that had been going on for months. It was a simple assignment on the surface, but in the military, nothing is ever as it seems. I arrived in the village at dusk, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains and the long shadows covered the aged wooden houses. The few inhabitants I saw moved slowly, their faces filled with inexplicable sadness. I made my way to the tavern, the only place that seemed to have any kind of life. As he entered, the murmur of conversation came to a screeching halt. Everyone looked at me suspiciously. I approached the counter and asked for a room from the innkeeper, a man with a stern face and dark eyes. "Not many outsiders come this way," he said as he handed me the key. "I'm here for the disappearances," I replied bluntly. The man sighed and, after a moment's hesitation, pointed to a table in the corner where a black-haired, green-eyed woman was staring at me intently. "Talk to Isabella. She knows more than anyone here could tell you." I approached the woman and she invited me to sit down with a gesture. His eyes seemed to pierce my soul. "You're brave to come here, Martin," he said in a soft but firm voice, "but I don't know if your bravery will be enough." I asked her about the disappearances, and she told me stories of men and women fading into the night, of shadows moving through the trees, and of whispers in the wind that froze the blood. Isabella was not just another inhabitant. There was something different about her, an ancient wisdom and a deep sadness. Days went by and I started researching. Every night he scoured the village and the surrounding area, looking for clues. But he always came back empty-handed and with a growing sense of unease. Isabella and I talked every day, and little by little, I began to notice that her company was becoming more and more indispensable to me. There was something about her that attracted me, a mixture of fear and fascination. One night I decided to follow her. I saw her come out of the tavern and into the nearby woods. I followed her at a safe distance, my steps silenced by the leaf litter. The full moon lit the way and cast haunting shadows. After a long walk, he came to a clearing where a circle of stones rose, marking an ancient and forgotten place. Isabella stood in the center of the circle and began to murmur words in a language I didn't recognize. Suddenly, the air became dense and heavy, and a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. She was tall, with eyes that shone in an unnatural light. I felt a shiver run down my spine and hid behind a tree, watching in silence. The figure approached Isabella and whispered something in her ear. She nodded and suddenly looked up to where I was hiding. His green eyes shone with a terrifying intensity. "Get out of there, Martin," he said in a voice that echoed in the clearing. "There's no point in hiding anymore." I came out of hiding, feeling the fear paralyze me. The dark figure stared at me curiously, and then disappeared into nothingness. "You've discovered my secret," Isabella said, walking toward me. "I'm not just a woman. I am the guardian of this place, a witch who protects the town from even greater evils." I tried to speak, but the words were getting stuck in my throat. She touched my arm, and I felt a current of energy run through my body. "I didn't cause the disappearances, but I know who did. There is an ancient presence in these mountains, something that has recently awakened." Together, we went even deeper into the forest, guided by Isabella. We came to a deep, dark cave. Inside, the air was frozen, and the murmurs he had heard before were now screams of agony. We saw lost souls trapped by an entity that fed on their desperation. Isabella began to recite a spell, her voice firm and powerful. The entity, a formless shadow, writhed and shrieked, but could not resist Isabella's power. Gradually, the souls were released, and the darkness that had enveloped the village began to dissipate. When it was all over, we emerged from the cave exhausted, but victorious. Isabella looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You've been brave, Martin. But this place is not for you. You must leave and not look back." I wanted to protest, but I knew he was right. My mission was over, and although I had found a deep connection with her, I understood that her fate and mine could not be intertwined. I went back to the village, gathered my things, and got ready to leave. Before I left, I looked for Isabella one last time, but she had disappeared. The villagers began to emerge from their homes, their faces relieved and grateful. They said goodbye to me with smiles and words of thanks, but in my heart, I carried the shadow of what I had seen and felt. As I walked away from town, I knew I would never forget Isabella or the dark secret she was keeping. My life would go on, but a part of me would always remain in that place, in the company of a witch and the mysteries of the mountains. Months later, on moonless nights, I still feel his gaze above me, whispers in the wind that bring back memories of a mission and an impossible love. The connection we formed, the darkness we faced together, lives on in my memory, and in the darkest moments I wonder if I'll ever cross those mountains again, searching for answers that were buried in the cave and in the heart of a witch named Isabella. Story 2. Sebastian Marquez, the false soldier and the mission in Puerto Spectral. My name is Sebastian Marquez, and I've always been an ordinary guy, but with an unusual dream: to be a soldier. I didn't have the strength or discipline to pull it off, so I settled for the life I led in my neighborhood, surrounded by friends who shared my fate. But something in me craved more. I wanted the adrenaline, the excitement, the respect. That's how I ended up getting involved in the world of crime, as a hawk for a local gang. My job was simple: to keep an eye out and warn if the police came. But my life changed drastically when one day I decided to pretend to be what I always wanted to be. I got an authentic military uniform through a contact on the black market. It wasn't hard to fool others. With my height and bearing, the uniform fit me as if it had been tailor-made. My charade soon became a dangerous reality when a real commander, deceived by my appearance, gave me a mission. It was a gray afternoon when I received the order. I was on one of the many street corners observing the routine movement of the neighborhood when a military jeep pulled up in front of me. A stern-looking officer with scars telling stories of past battles stared at me and handed me a sealed envelope. "Private Marquez, we have a mission for you," he said in a voice that didn't allow questioning. I nodded, unable to deny or confess the truth. Opening the envelope later, in the privacy of my home, I realized that my life was about to take an even more unexpected turn. The mission was to investigate an alleged witchcraft activity in a remote location, an ancient seaside town called Spectral Harbor. It was rumored that there, a group of witches performed covens and dark rituals that had caused the disappearance of several previously sent soldiers. The journey to Spectral Harbor was long and lonely. The old boat that carried me creaked with each wave as if its timbers hid thousand-year-old secrets. The air grew thicker and colder as we got closer, and an ominous foreboding came over me. I arrived in the village at dusk. Ghost Harbor was a desolate place with old houses and fog-shrouded streets. The few remaining inhabitants looked at me with a mixture of fear and distrust. I made my way to the local tavern, hoping to find some clue. Inside, the atmosphere was gloomy. The few patrons drank in silence, and the tavern keeper, an old man with a white beard and tired eyes, greeted me with an alert expression. "You're not the first one here, soldier," he said hoarsely. The others did not return. His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't back down. My charade had brought me there, and I must move on. I inquired about the coven, and the tavern keeper pointed out a path that led deep into the woods. I decided to leave immediately, hoping to find answers before darkness completely engulfed me. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Every step he took seemed to echo in the dead silence. Suddenly, I saw a dim light in the distance. I cautiously approached and discovered an old cabin lit by black candles. The air was heavy with the smell of incense and something else, something metallic that I recognized as blood. I went to a window and looked inside. What I saw left me paralyzed. A group of women dressed in black robes moved in a circle around an altar. Their voices murmured words in an arcane language, and in the center of the altar was a human figure, motionless. Suddenly, one of the witches raised her head and looked straight at me. His eyes were two wells of infinite darkness. An inhuman scream rang in my ears, and I felt the ground open up under my feet. Everything went black. I woke up in a dark, damp cell. My uniform was torn and stained with blood. The walls were covered with strange and unrecognizable symbols. My head throbbed with excruciating pain, and my memories were confusing and frightening fragments. One of the witches appeared before me. His face was a mask of cruelty and malice. "Did you think you could fool us, soldier?" he whispered. "We know who you are and why you're here, but now you're ours." His words were like blades in my mind. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. I was trapped in a nightmare from which I could not wake up. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Every night, the witches performed their rituals, and I was a centerpiece in their ceremonies. They experimented with me, looking for something inside me, something I didn't understand. My sanity was slowly fading, and the line between reality and delirium was blurred. Finally, the day of the Great Coven arrived. The witches led me to the clearing in the forest where a huge circle was traced on the ground. The stars shone with an unnatural intensity, and the air was charged with a dark, palpable energy. They placed me in the center of the circle and began to sing. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and an invisible force lifted me into the air. I felt my body disintegrate, my soul torn from me. The faces of the witches were the last things I saw before absolute darkness enveloped me. I woke up in a military hospital with a commander by my side. He told me that I had been found in the woods, disoriented, and in a state of shock. No one believed my story of the witches and the coven. They thought that isolation and fear had affected my mind. I went back to my neighborhood, but it wasn't the same anymore. The nights were a torture of nightmares and visions. The shadows seemed to come to life, and the whispers of the witches never left me. He had pretended to be a soldier and paid the ultimate price. Now I can only wait in the gloom, knowing that one day the witches will come back for me. Story 3. Diego Esteban. The Night of the Witches. The crackling of the branches under our boots was the only sound that broke the silence of the night. We marched in single file, each of us attentive to any movement in the dense jungle. The mission was clear: infiltrate enemy territory, gather information, and return undetected. However, something in the air told me that that night would be different. My name is Diego Esteban, and I am currently 36 years old. Everything was going well, but suddenly an intoxicating scent enveloped us, a floral perfume that had no place in that jungle. The other soldiers began to murmur uneasily. I tried to stay calm, but the air seemed charged with a strange energy. About 100 meters away, we caught a glimpse of a faint light emanating from a clearing. We decided to investigate. What we found there defied all logic. In the middle of the clearing, a group of women of unreal beauty danced around a bonfire. His movements were hypnotic, his laughter melodious and ethereal. Their white clothes fluttered in the night breeze, contrasting with the darkness of the jungle. We froze, fascinated by the scene. The women invited us to join them. Their voices were seductive and warm. Against all common sense, we get closer. The lieutenant was the first to be caught by his charm. One of the women took him by the hand and led him to the center of the circle. Soon we were all surrounded. One of the women, with eyes as black as night, came up to me and whispered something incomprehensible in my ear. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't take my eyes off his eyes. It was as if he was bewitched. As the night progressed, the atmosphere became denser and more oppressive. The melodious laughter turned into sinister laughter, and the beautiful faces began to distort into grotesque grimaces. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I felt as if an invisible force was holding me down, preventing me from moving. Suddenly, everything erupted into hellish chaos. The women, now turned into horrendous witches, pounced upon us with colossal ferocity. His nails elongated into claws and his teeth became fangs. The jungle was filled with screams and shrieks. The sergeant managed to draw his weapon and fired at one of the witches, who collapsed instantly. This seemed to break the spell, and we were able to react. We fought back as best we could, firing blindly in the darkness, the flashes of bullets briefly illuminating the horrific faces of our attackers. We managed to take down several of them, but not without cost. The lieutenant was dragged to the bonfire, where he disappeared in an explosion of fire and smoke. The corporal, my best friend, fell with his neck shattered by one of those creatures. The fighting was fierce and desperate, but eventually, the remaining witches fled, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. The morning found us in a sorry state. The survivors, 4 of the 10 of us, were covered in wounds and scars, both physical and mental. We returned to our base in silence, each deep in thought. The captain questioned us about what had happened, but he couldn't believe what we were telling him. Who could do it? The wounds were proof enough of the struggle, but the invisible marks on our souls were even deeper. Sleepless nights, disturbing visions, and a constant feeling of being watched were our new companions. Months later, we still can't forget that night. Each of us carries the scars in different ways. Some found solace in drink, others in religion, and I in writing. But there is one thing we can never erase: the latent fear that accompanies us at every turn, the fear that these creatures could return at any moment. Every time I close my eyes, I relive the horrors of that night. I see my companions fall one by one, their screams still ringing in my ears. Witches, their faces warped by evil, loom over us like shadows that never dissipate. I try to rationalize what happened, but there is no logic that can explain what we experienced. I wake up every night, drenched in sweat, convinced that witches are there, right out of my sight. Sometimes in the dark, I think I see their spectral forms moving in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to finish what they started. My wife says it's just nightmares, but I know it's something more. We began to meet in secret, the few who remained. We needed to talk about what happened, find a way to understand it, and perhaps protect ourselves. Each encounter was a struggle against despair, an attempt to hold on to our humanity in the midst of the madness that consumed us. One day, one of our own didn't show up. We found him in his house, his eyes wide, staring into space. In his hands, a diary with pages full of strange symbols and drawings of witches. His mind had succumbed to the horrors we had experienced, and his body soon followed. We knew it wouldn't be the last. I tried to move on, immersing myself in my work and my family, but nothing could chase away the memories. I found myself writing frantically, trying to exorcise the demons that plagued me. Every word was a fight against fear, a battle to keep my sanity. But even in daylight, shadows lurked. My son once asked me why I wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain that every corner of my mind was riddled with images of terror? How could he tell her that his father, a trained and strong soldier, had been reduced to a mass of fear and paranoia by creatures who should not exist? Over time, I realized that I could never escape what I had seen. The witches had taken more than the lives of my companions. They had taken away our peace, our security. Each of us was scarred for life, with scars that haunt us even in our most peaceful dreams. And as I write these last lines, I feel a shiver run down my spine. Sometimes, in the darkness of my room, I think I hear those distant laughter, those seductive voices that led us to perdition. I look out the window, and in the shadow of the night, I see figures watching me, waiting. Reality or imagination? I don't know. The only thing that is certain is that Halloween never really ended. In the stillness of the night, when the world seems asleep, I wonder if I will ever find peace. But part of me knows the truth. Those creatures are still there somewhere, waiting for the moment to reappear. What will happen when they do? Will we be ready? Or will we fall under its spell again? The end of our story is not yet written. The scars we carry are a constant reminder of the battle we are fighting and those that are yet to come. We keep going, day by day, hoping that one day the shadows will dissipate and we can find some peace. But until then, we watch the darkness, waiting for the inevitable, knowing that the real battle is not over yet.